It's late, the music's already off. You turned it down 20 minutes ago when you realized it was getting a bit much, and then the knock comes anyway. Evening, we've had a noise complaint about this address. Can we come in and have a look? And because you've already done the responsible thing, already turned it down, already know you're not really being unreasonable, the instinct is to open the door wide and just let them see for themselves. Nothing to hide, right? So why not just show them? Here's what almost nobody thinks about in that exact moment. A noise complaint, even a genuine one, even one made by an annoyed and entirely reasonable neighbor, does not by itself give officers a right to walk into your home. It's a report, not a warrant, not a specific power, not your permission already granted on your behalf. And the moment you open that door and step back, inviting them in to have a look, you've handed over the one thing they didn't already have, which is lawful entry into your home, based on nothing more than wanting to seem cooperative about something you'd already sorted out anyway. Get this wrong, and a complaint that could have been resolved in 30 seconds on the doorstep turns into officers walking through your living room, your kitchen, sometimes further, based entirely on your own invitation rather than any actual power they were using. Get it right, and you can be completely calm, completely reasonable, genuinely responsive to a fair complaint, without ever needing to open that door and let anyone through it. So today, I want to walk you through exactly what a noise complaint visit actually is, why it's fundamentally different from the door knocks we've covered elsewhere on this channel, the calm words that resolve it properly from the doorstep, and what changes if the situation is genuinely more serious than an ordinary noise complaint. This is general legal education for England and Wales, not legal advice for your specific situation, and I'm not your solicitor. And I want to say clearly, this isn't about being difficult with officers doing a fairly routine, often slightly tedious part of their job. Responding to noise complaints is genuinely one of the more mundane things they deal with, and most of the time this entire interaction is over in under a minute, resolved with nothing more than a nod and a request to keep it down. This is about the specific moment where that ordinary interaction quietly turns into something bigger than it needed to be, purely because a door got opened wider than it needed to. Let's start with what's actually true here, because it's the same foundational principle that runs through every door knock scenario on this channel. Your home is not the street. To lawfully cross your threshold, an officer generally needs one of three things: a warrant, a specific legal power that applies right there in that moment, or your genuine consent. A noise complaint, on its own, is none of these. It's information, a report that someone's called in about noise coming from your address, and responding to that report is exactly what brings an officer to your door in the first place, but the report itself doesn't unlock the door for them. If they had a specific power to enter without your permission, they'd be using it, not politely asking if they can come in and have a look. Here's the trap underneath the moment, and it runs on exactly the same instinct we've covered elsewhere on this channel, just wearing a slightly gentler disguise. Because the underlying situation feels so minor, loud music, nothing sinister, most people's guard drops completely. It doesn't feel like the kind of encounter where rights matter. It feels like a small, slightly embarrassing inconvenience, best resolved by being as agreeable as possible, as quickly as possible. And that exact feeling, this is too trivial to bother thinking about properly, is precisely what makes people open the door fully and step back without a second thought, in a way they might hesitate over in a more obviously serious encounter. So let's talk about the wrong response, because I've seen this pattern constantly, and it's rarely dramatic, which is exactly the problem. The instinctive, embarrassed version of this goes like this. Someone opens the door fully, already slightly sheepish about the complaint, and says, "Sorry about that. Yeah, come in, have a look. We've already turned it down." In stepping back and letting the door swing open, an entry that was never actually required for a fair resolution of the complaint has now happened anyway, purely through politeness. Nothing sinister necessarily follows from that. Most of the time it genuinely doesn't. But the point is that it never needed to happen in the first place, and once officers are inside, if anything else in that home happens to catch their attention for entirely separate reasons, that noise complaint has quietly become the doorway, literally, into something else entirely. Here is the calm, simple response, and I want you to hold on to it exactly as it's phrased. Thanks for letting me know. We've already turned it down. I don't need you to come in to check that. That's the whole thing. Notice what it does. Thanks for letting me know acknowledges the complaint politely, without defensiveness. We've already turned it down states the plain, factual resolution. And I don't need you to come in to check that closes the door, literally and figuratively, on an entry that was never actually required, without being remotely rude about it. Let me be completely clear about something important here, because it changes how this should actually be handled. If the situation genuinely isn't a simple noise complaint, if there's a real welfare concern, someone in obvious danger inside, sounds of a genuine emergency, this is not the moment to hold firmly to the line above. Step outside if it helps them see you're safe, let them know clearly what's actually happening, and cooperate fully. Because everything in this video is specifically about the ordinary noise complaint, loud music, a party running later than the neighbors would like, not a genuine emergency dressed up as one. Now let me walk you through what happens if an officer pushes a little further, because sometimes, not out of bad intent, simply out of habit, they do. We just need to pop in and confirm it's sorted. Won't take a minute. That's exactly the moment to stay on the same calm line, gently. I appreciate that, but it really has been turned down. You're welcome to stand here and listen if you'd like to confirm it from the doorstep. That last part matters because it offers a genuine, reasonable way to actually verify the complaint has been addressed, standing right there, listening, without requiring entry at all. Most of the time, this resolves things completely, because the actual purpose of the visit, confirming the noise has stopped, is achieved without anyone needing to step over the threshold. There's a secondary point worth understanding, because it comes up constantly in exactly this scenario, and it's about what happens if there's a party still genuinely going on, not fully wound down, when the knock comes. The instinct here is often panic, to either freeze the whole house into silence and pretend nobody's home, or to fling the door open and over-apologize while inviting officers in to survey the scene. Neither is necessary. The same calm approach works, acknowledging the complaint honestly, stating clearly that it's being addressed right now, turning it down further as you speak if it genuinely still needs it, and declining entry while remaining completely honest about the fact that yes, there is a gathering happening, it's simply being brought down to a reasonable volume. I also want to address the specific worry that stops people from holding this line, which is the fear that declining entry over something as minor as a noise complaint will somehow make the situation look worse than it is, will make officers suspicious of what else might be going on inside. It's worth saying plainly that this concern, while understandable, generally isn't borne out in practice. Noise complaints are an extremely routine, high-volume part of ordinary policing, and a calm, polite doorstep resolution, without entry, is an entirely normal, unremarkable outcome that officers deal with constantly. Declining entry doesn't read as suspicious. It reads as someone who simply handled the complaint properly from where they were already standing. Let me bring this together into what it actually sounds like when it goes the way it should. The knock comes, you open the door. Evening. We've had a noise complaint about this address. And you, calmly, warmly even. Thanks for letting me know. We've already turned it down, actually. I don't need you to come in to check that. But you're welcome to stand here and have a listen if you'd like. A brief pause. Genuinely. Sounds fine from here. Thanks for sorting it. No problem at all. Night then. The whole thing over in under a minute. Nobody's home entered. Nothing escalated. And a completely ordinary complaint handled exactly as ordinarily as it should have been. Now picture the version that goes slightly wrong, not through anything dramatic, but through simple over-politeness. Same knock, same complaint. But this time, feeling slightly embarrassed about it, the door opens fully. Come in, have a look, we've sorted it. Officers step inside, confirm the music's been turned down, which it genuinely has, and leave a few minutes later, having seen the inside of a home that never actually needed to be seen for the complaint itself to be properly resolved. Nothing bad necessarily happened in that particular version, But the entry itself, the thing that was never required, happened anyway, purely because it felt more polite in the moment than it needed to be. There's a practical detail worth understanding, because it changes how this scenario plays out if it happens more than once. And that's what occurs when a single address gets repeated noise complaints over time. A one-off visit, handled calmly and honestly from the doorstep, generally ends there. But if the same address keeps generating complaints, the response can shift from an informal, friendly doorstep chat into something more formal, sometimes involving the local council's environmental health team rather than the police at all, who have separate powers to investigate persistent noise and, in genuinely repeated cases, to issue a formal noise abatement notice. This is worth knowing because the calm, doorstep approach we've walked through here is specifically for the ordinary, occasional complaint. And if you know a particular address has a pattern of complaints behind it, that's exactly the situation where getting ahead of it, being proactively considerate about noise before it escalates to a formal process, matters far more than any clever doorstep phrasing ever could. I also want to touch on the relationship between this scenario and the neighbor who actually made the complaint, because how you handle that relationship afterward often matters more than the doorstep conversation itself. It's worth resisting the urge to march next door immediately afterward to confront whoever you suspect complained, however tempting that feels in the moment. Noise complaints are usually made precisely because someone felt they had no other reasonable way to raise the issue directly, and a calm, low-key acknowledgement at some later point, a brief apology in passing, an offer to give a heads up before future gatherings, tends to prevent the next complaint far more effectively than any confrontation ever would. The doorstep moment with the officer is about your rights and the immediate situation, but the actual long-term fix for repeat noise issues almost always lives in that ordinary neighborly conversation rather than in anything to do with the police at all. There's one more angle worth understanding, particularly if you're a tenant rather than a homeowner, because it adds a layer that owner-occupiers don't need to think about. If you're renting, a pattern of noise complaints can sometimes also reach your landlord or letting agent, depending on the terms of your tenancy agreement, entirely separately from anything the police do. Handling the doorstep conversation calmly and keeping noise reasonable going forward protects you on both fronts at once. The immediate police interaction and the longer-term relationship with whoever holds your tenancy, which is exactly why treating even a single, seemingly minor complaint with genuine seriousness, rather than dismissing it as an overreaction from an oversensitive neighbor, tends to serve people far better in the long run. Let me also touch on the specific fear that sometimes sits underneath this whole encounter for people hosting a larger gathering, a birthday, a celebration, something with genuinely more people than an ordinary evening at home, because the stakes can feel higher and the instinct to overcorrect through full cooperation can feel stronger too. The same underlying principle applies regardless of the size of the gathering. A noise complaint about a party is still simply information about noise, not a power to enter and inspect who's there, what's happening, or how many people are present. If the volume is genuinely being addressed, which is the actual substance of any noise complaint, the size of the gathering inside doesn't change what officers are and aren't entitled to do at your door, and the same calm, doorstep resolution applies just as cleanly to a full house as it does to a single loud speaker left on too long. I want to close by acknowledging something that makes this scenario feel different from most of what we cover on this channel, which is the underlying awkwardness of it all. Nobody feels proud standing at their own front door explaining themselves over a noise complaint, and that faint embarrassment is exactly what makes people want to rush the interaction along by simply agreeing to whatever seems easiest. But rushing toward an unnecessary entry doesn't actually make the awkwardness end any faster. It just adds an extra, entirely avoidable step to an interaction that was already heading toward a perfectly ordinary, brief resolution the whole time. One last practical thought worth carrying with you, because it's the kind of small habit that prevents this entire scenario more effectively than any doorstep phrase ever could. If you know in advance that a gathering might run louder or later than usual, a birthday, a celebration, a genuinely good excuse for noise, A brief, friendly heads up to immediate neighbors beforehand, even just a quick knock or a note through the letterbox, tends to prevent the complaint from ever being made in the first place. This isn't required, and nothing about failing to do it changes any of the rights we've walked through today. But it's worth knowing as the genuinely simplest version of all of this, the version where the knock never comes at all, because the neighbor who might otherwise have called already knew what to expect and had already decided it was fine. So let's bring the whole thing together, because underneath the mild embarrassment of a noise complaint, it really does come down to one simple habit. A complaint about noise is information, not a power to enter, and the vast majority of the time, the entire matter can be resolved honestly and completely from your own doorstep. Acknowledge the complaint politely, confirm honestly what's actually being done about it, and offer, if it helps, to let an officer listen from where they're already standing, rather than opening the door wide out of pure politeness. That combination, genuine honesty about an ordinary situation, paired with a calm, unnecessary entry-avoiding habit, is what keeps a completely mundane doorstep visit exactly as mundane as it should have been all along. If this helped you, do two things for me. Share it with anyone you know who's ever had a party run a little later than the neighbors would like, because this exact scene plays out in student houses and family homes across the country every single weekend, and most people have simply never thought about the fact that opening the door fully was never actually required. And subscribe, because I break down exactly this kind of thing, in plain English, so that the next time that knock comes at the least convenient possible moment, you already know exactly how calmly and how completely 30 seconds on your own doorstep can actually resolve it.